Hi, everybody. Welcome to Crystal Ball 2022 Ethanol. This is the third iteration of our Crystal Ball 2022 series. The first one was on RNG and EV markets, took place in December. The second one was renewable diesel and biodiesel, which took place in January. And now we're here for ethanol. These are our presenters. We're going to have Sarah Caswell, a senior policy consultant, talking to us about all the things that have been going on in legislature lately. It is a lot. And Roxby Hartley will talk to us a little bit about the emerging markets that have to do with the ethanol industry, and Mark Heckman about some sustainable farming practices and other ways to get your ethanol to net zero. And Jim will be talking to us about a look back at the ethanol industry in 2021 and looking forward to this year and where it's going to go, and even more about net zero ethanol. So I am going to play a short video that explains how EcoEngineers can help you in this low carbon world.
Carbon is the biggest disruptor of the 21st century, and the world as we know it is changing. EcoEngineers can guide you to make the best decisions as you navigate toward your clean energy goals. Our diverse team of carbon analysts, engineers, scientists, auditors, and regulatory specialists are trusted advisors of the clean energy fuel sectors worldwide. Clean energy regulations are a maze. We simplify them with an unbiased approach and fully manage your compliance. Modeling your carbon reduction is complicated. We quantify your emissions with a rigor based in science. Together, we can create markets that will protect and grow your investment. We create sustainable solutions for a better tomorrow. We are EcoEngineers.
Hi, I'm Shashi Menon, the CEO of EcoEngineers. That video you just saw is EcoEngineers in a nutshell. We're a team of consultants, auditors, engineers, and scientists with deep expertise in low-carbon fuels, emerging technologies, and policies that are helping decarbonize the world. We are at the heart of the energy transition. At EcoEngineers, we are laser-focused on aiding, assisting, and supporting this transition to a clean energy economy. Through our education programs, our science-based approach to life cycle carbon analysis, through our asset development support, our engagement with policymakers, and through our compliance management and auditing teams, we provide a 360 approach to usher in the clean energy transition. The ultimate success of low-carbon fuel projects, and ultimately the future of our planet, depends on the successful execution of net zero goals. And that's exactly what our team is here to help you do. Thank you.
All right, so I'd like to introduce Jim Ram, who's going to go into a little bit more detail about our agenda today.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. And thanks everyone for taking time to join us. We have a panel of experts, as Lindsay indicated, to talk about the following shoe list for ethanol. So that shoe list includes, Sarah's going to talk about RVOs and policy. I'm going to take a look at the look back and the look forward, and also at net zero ethanol. I'm going to visit a little bit about carbon capture, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mark to talk about sustainable farm practices and kernel fiber ethanol. And finally, we're going to go to Roxby to talk about emerging markets and sustainable aviation fuel. And then we'll come back for a Q&A.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. As Jim said, we're excited about today's webinar. There's just so much momentum in the United States and around the world to promote and incentivize the development, availability, and use of clean transportation fuels to displace fuels with higher emissions. My colleagues Jim, Mark, and Roxby will discuss the various programs in great detail. So in the next 8 to 10 minutes, I'm just going to provide a very quick high-level overview of some of the key developments happening at the state, federal, and global levels. So let's begin here at the federal level with the Biden administration. Many of you were probably on or aware of EPA's two-day virtual workshop this week, during which EPA discussed updating its greenhouse gas emissions modeling methodology from biofuels made from land-based feedstocks, including corn. Written comments are due to the agency by April 1st. If you want to comment on EPA's proposed consent decree, with Growth Energy, committing to getting out the 2021 and 2022 final RVOs by June 3rd. You may submit written comments to the agency by March 25th. And USDA currently has a funding availability notice out for its Climate Smart Partnerships program. The agency has its second workshop designed to help stakeholders access the funding today at 2 p.m. The registration link is on this slide. Over in Congress, there are a few key developments to keep on your radar screens. I won't repeat what's on the slide here, but I encourage all ethanol stakeholders to follow federal and state agency implementation of the new infrastructure law, progress on the Next Generation Fuels Act, which is currently in a House committee for consideration, and progress on Build Back Better legislation, which has the ability and potential to open up incentives and funding opportunities for ethanol and other clean fuels. Many states are working at various stages to push forward clean fuel legislation or regulations. Again, given the tight timing of this webinar and all the content that we need to get to, I'm not going to repeat the information on the slide, but I do encourage all ethanol stakeholders to follow the progress of this work in Iowa, California, and Oregon, and to consider submitting written comments during open comment periods in California, Oregon, and Washington to impact the final rules in those states. The regulations that will be finalized will govern the rules of the game in terms of the level of incentives and credits that will be available to promote the investment in and development of innovative farming practices and biofuel production. I also encourage the same with respect to Washington, as I mentioned before. And just quickly, there are some additional important updates in other states looking towards clean fuel laws. In the last month, New Mexico clean fuel legislation failed to pass the Senate by a tie vote because the bill's opponents successfully convinced enough senators that it would negatively impact gas prices. Biofuel stakeholders have already begun looking to get clean fuel legislation passed there in 2023. In Nebraska, biofuel stakeholders are engaged in an education push this year for clean fuel legislation, with plans to advocate for introduction and passage of such a bill next year. In New York, biofuel stakeholders are working to get clean fuel legislation passed there, even though it's not on the governor's priority list this year. In Minnesota, we're waiting for the governor there to issue his report on the various stakeholder meetings he's held recently on clean fuel legislation in that state. So that's the status of that right now. In Illinois, there's also a preliminary effort and discussions between stakeholders in the governor's office toward getting a clean fuel bill there. I would stay tuned for more developments there in 2023. And the same goes for Michigan. There, the governor has indicated public support of clean fuel legislation. And so it'll be important to keep Michigan on the list of states to keep tabs on this year and next. On the global level, so Canada is expected to issue its final clean fuel regulation sometime this spring. And it will be interesting to see whether it's updated from the proposed version to better incentivize biofuels, as some industry stakeholders requested, including Advanced Biofuels Canada. In Quebec, they've issued their final clean fuel regulation, which will become effective next January. And in the UK, the Department of Transport there recently released its proposed low carbon fuel strategy. The department encouraged stakeholders to provide comments, and they may do so until April 25th. So all of this information provides an overview of the breadth and the momentum of programs to promote clean fuels, including ethanol. And if you'd like our help to prepare comments of any of the items that I've discussed, please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back over to Jim Ram to dig in a little deeper. Jim?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. It sounds like a lot of expansion and improvements to the different carbon programs. Thank you. So I'm going to dive in a little bit, and these updates are important to anybody who participates in the lower 48 states as far as transportation fuels in terms of compliance. Anyone who participates in California or Oregon or Canadian programs, and anybody who's really interested in emerging markets. So this is a look back at the RIN prices, and you can see that the RIN prices are trending up. The ones that matter most to ethanol would be the gray D6 and then the green D3. And you can see a couple things here. Certainly, you can see that ethanol RIN prices have remained high, around $1 or north of $1, and that high price benefits ethanol markets. It may be driven a little bit by the D4 and D5 prices and the demand for feedstock. And certainly, there's been a direct benefit of the price for distillers corn oil, and you can see that the D3 prices remain very high, which drives the investment in renewable natural gas, and it drives the investment in kernel fiber ethanol, especially right now would be separate processing, and hopefully at some point again in situ processing. So a lot of the questions that Sarah talked about, the emphasis right now in rulemaking, what we're hearing is the emphasis is on eRINs and eRIN pathway, and the emphasis is on biointermediate type work. So there is, I think, hope for eRIN pathways and biointermediate type projects to move forward. And so many of these questions will get better information later in the year. The RVOs in June, as Sarah mentioned, and what happens post 2023. So just an update on California and looking at the ethanol pathways that got registered. So there were 76 total new ethanol pathways into California in 2021 up until today. Many of those are recertifications of plants. So plants who participate in California continue to add lower carbon technology and continue to do recertifications. There were 4 new applications, so 4 new applications entering the market. But in terms of feedstock, 32 cornstarch, 15 for fiber, for sorghum, and for sugarcane. You can see the numbers there. So what is going on with LCFS prices? So there's a supply and demand situation going on, and the current credit value is low in comparison to the past several years. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the reasons for that low, but it is a supply and demand reasoning. So in this slide, you can see where the blue being the credits and the red being the deficits, that the credits outpace the deficits being generated. And that's new. And because of that, the green line is actually going up, which is the credit bank. The thing I would point out here is that these credits remain good. LCFS credits do not retire, and so those credits remain marketable. And it's really just supply and demand that brings the price down. So what is happening? You can see in this slide that ethanol, the green line, is now in 3rd place as far as carbon credit generation in California. And what's above it? Electricity, renewable diesel is expanding rapidly in the top blue line. And then biomethane is coming up and growing significantly. So it's really electric, renewable natural gas, and renewable diesel are changing the availability of credits and bringing that price down. In terms of the LCFS outlook, there really are a number of questions about the future of the program. We have a program, California has a program that's running quite well to encourage low carbon fuels, and there's a number of questions that we're watching about what's the future of the program. So in order to take a deeper dive on this, I want to announce that we have new reports available for California LCFS and the renewable, and also the renewable fuel standard. And so if you're participating in those markets, if you're looking to invest in technology to better enable you to participate in those markets, I recommend you talk to your, consider these reports. They come out on an annual basis, and there are quarterly updates, and there are some LCFS credit pricing analyses and RIN pricing analyses that look at the different variables that are now in play. So I want to switch gears to the importance of net zero ethanol and talk about that. We've been talking about this for a while, and really it's ethanol's opportunity because of the corn plant, its interaction with the atmosphere, its interaction with soil carbon at the Earth's surface, and the possibility of the CO2 that the yeast generate to be taken off the top of the fermenters and be injected underground. So there's two great carbon sinks that are really a significant advantage to ethanol in today's marketplace. This is the carb score. Blue on the bottom is the ethanol, and the goal is to get to zero. So the vertical line, zero. And the reason that RNG and electric and renewable diesel are doing so well in the market is that they're really driving towards zero. So we have a huge drive towards zero, led by the Renewable Fuels Association, by Growth, by ACE, to move towards zero. And so you can see where ethanol is. The red dot is for ethanol. The average is about 59. And we have a couple of opportunities. There's certainly a big opportunity in kernel fiber to add kernel fiber gallons in the 20 to 30 range. There's a huge opportunity to move starch gallons left of the sugarcane gallons by going to carbon capture. And there's a huge opportunity to continue to drive those scores down using sustainable agriculture that Mark will talk about. So this is from Argonne. This is from the Department of Energy, Argonne. And on the left is pure gasoline. Everything on the right is related to ethanol. So pure gasoline, what Argonne says, is at about 93, and average ethanol is at 54 in this slide. So ethanol can do some things that gasoline can never do. So on the left, the pure gasoline, the light gray box is combustion emissions. So anytime you take fossil fuel from deep under the ground, 350 million year old fossil fuel, 350 million year old carbon, and you bring it to the surface and combust it, you're going to have this combustion emissions. Ethanol doesn't have that combustion emissions. And so ethanol can start from 54 and it can go to zero and it can go below zero. And Argonne's really giving ethanol a business model here in terms of switching to renewable forms of process heat, renewable electricity, a big jump in terms of carbon capture and sequestration, low carbon farming, low carbon fertilizers, and then sustainable cover crops to really push things even negative. So this is a look at ESG goals. So when RFA says that ethanol will be at, so the assumptions here is that ethanol is at 70% greenhouse gas reduction on average. So if I make that assumption, then let's say that I'm a fleet owner and I want to look at how do I improve my ESG score. This shows how a fleet owner might reduce their liquid gallons. They should reduce their liquid gallons usage. They should get lower and lower carbon refining, and then they could use ethanol to achieve 40, 42, 70% GHG emission reductions. So ethanol really does have a place in ESG scoring that I don't think we talk about enough. So all of the technologies are either currently available or rapidly emerging for this net zero drive. And many of these are built out, they're proven technologies. And every single ethanol plant has a unique thing about the place that they are. And that could be that they're near a pipeline that's going to have a CO2 pipeline, or it could be that they're near an injection site where they could inject CO2. It could be that there's a lot of dairy in the area, you know, and we're talking about concentrations of dairy, concentrations of swine that allow them to go down RNG pathways. There may be other forms of biomass that are available to them, or they could be in a good wind area. a good solar area. Everyone has something unique that they can improve their carbon intensity profile. You know, we've been talking about this a long time, and a lot of times we were talking about what was inside the fence of the facility, which was we've been talking about ILUC and corn farming. Mark's going to talk about that. And what's really new are the three big deducts that can drive towards net zero on the right. The deducts for carbon capture, for process heat, it could be 20 points, and for sustainable agriculture, I mean, it can really be significant reductions. So carbon capture, big topic. CARB has put out a protocol that really is shaping industry right now and opening the door for many business plans. And we have the IRS providing the 45Q. And so the IRS 45Q, it really makes this decision kind of a no-brainer for many facilities, and it really drives investment for many facilities. What a huge opportunity for ethanol to really shift the market and go towards net zero. So what we're looking for is permanent sequestration, and for CARB that means 100 years. We're really digging into the CARB protocol and protocols like it that it is going to drive. So you're aware that half of the ethanol industry has indicated that they are pursuing carbon capture to date, and we have a couple of pieces of information out there. We have a couple of design-based pathways. One is for Red Trail, which is on-site or near-site carbon sequestration project, and it's pure carbon capture, and that's been considered a negative 32 to their CI points. And then we have another design-based pathway related to enhanced oil recovery. That's with Oxy and White Energy, and that's a 26-point reduction. Has been published by CARB. We consider this 4 phases. Phase 1 is education. Phase 2 is to perform a feasibility study. Phase 3 is pre-development of the project. These are fairly complex projects. And finally, to get to construction. So we have a team assembled. Roxby is a big part of that team as a geophysicist and as a lead regulatory engagement staff with CARB. We also have petroleum engineers and petroleum geologists on the team, and voluntary market lead at this point to help us help producers really get into this carbon capture space. With that, I want to turn it over to Mark Heckman.
Thanks, Jim. And I want to just say there's an excitement in the air that is this industry really has the ability to answer it. And that excitement is about moving that bubble that Jim talked about. And if you move to the left, what's circled there today is the ethanol world. And we'll move the starch portion to the left and expand that kernel fiber. So what I want to talk about is how much that opportunity is today for us to expand upon that. And as we move into that area, emission factors are all in place for this. And we're excited for what lies ahead for the supply chains, because no-till, cover crops, soil carbon sequestration, biochar, and those different farming practices are starting to be recognized. CARB is taking comments on that. EPA has a listening ear for how can we do this, and Sarah talked about the USDA grant that's out here to really drive it so that if you do have an idea or concept to push your farm practices or include your supply chain so that it scales up the use of these practices to be part of your supply chain, reach out and make yourself more knowledgeable about that. And why is that important? It's because of the CO2 equivalent that's nitrous oxide. The emission factors and the emission equivalents that come out of that, farming plays a great role of, that they have the ability to change those impacts. The different global warming potentials are shown here, almost 3 times as high. And by changing practices at scale, we can have a difference in that impact. The other side of that is it also reduces expenses at the farm and can actually do more with less. So how does this look at the actual farm level? And if you look at the farm level, farming energy itself is a pretty significant portion at 3 grams per megajoule, but fertilizers and the reduction of using the 4R principles to get it so that you're using the right amount, the right time, the right placement, and the right form all impacts that. And these emission factors are set by GREET as it is, and those are fairly well known. And then you also get into the sequestration. And so there is some discussion on, how much is permanent, where that is sequestered in the soil, but there's places where we agree to that. And as we move forward, I'm encouraged by what we're seeing and the modeling that can take place. And so how does that modeling look? The modeling, if you take the Midwest average, which is what is happening today with CARB and with the GREET modeling, as a farm, we're saddled with, or our supply chains basically are assigned a Midwest average. So on the left in the green is the typical yield, the fertilizer, and then the tillage practices that are being assumed. To that, on the right, it assigns a value without soil organic carbon at 29. Let's break this down a little bit different, where if we were to change this and break it down to site-specific farming practices. Here's how it looks in the case of our farm on Muscatine County. And what I've done is I've just said, the inquisitive person in myself, I said, how would my farm model as I'm doing this? And we are doing this on a major part of our acres, not all of it, but it reveals that if we just geographically shift to Muscatine County, we pick up a few points. If we change our yield to what our actual yields are in APHs, instead of taking the 178, it also gives us an improvement. Using fertilizer and manure and the use of the 4Rs practices at the right time, the right place, we're putting 40 pounds of nitrogen down with the planter, and the rest is being provided for by a natural source, manure, that's incorporated in the soil. Tillage, no-till, or strip tillage in that case. So the use of those practices drive us all the way down without soil organic carbon, or just considering the emissions, would be about 16.7 CI points. That's pretty incredible. Or the other, if you go all the way to include the soil organic carbon, you're talking about 40 CI points, or in this case, it'd be today's numbers about 42 cents per gallon. So it's a pretty significant amount, but there's some obstacles. And how do we get there? These are going to take some policy changes, and that's what CARB is asking for today. And those challenges that we've got, and as we reach out to regulatory engagement, it's establishing the practices in a disciplined way. It's establishing practices in the way that the models are intending it and recognizing it, and verifying all of that. It requires a team. It implies everybody has to be engaged in recognizing that. And if we can't take it all at once, can we break it down into emissions and then sequestration later? So just to summarize a little bit on that before we jump into the kernel fiber, it is a major accomplishment, but the amount of CI that we're talking about for farming practices is pretty substantial. It amounts to 50% of all of our CI of an ethanol plant, or 30 points plus. The other area that we can focus on for improvement, which is available today, is in the area of kernel fiber. And kernel fiber is looking at the actual fiber portion that's in the kernel that's being processed for the starch plants today. And currently we're doing that. Our plants today are processing a certain portion of that, and for enzymes and measuring, you have that ability. And because all the ethanol goes to the starch portion, there's no indirect land use and there's no farming or transportation burden. So there's an immediate effect that if you begin to capture and measure and validate the amount of fiber that's being captured in this, those gallons are associated with a direct gain in their CI, and California allows for that process to go through. RFS also allows for that with their processes and methods. And it's a way that plants can capture that if there is separate processing. We're advocating for and trying to figure different ways that the NREL method and these methods can be recognized by the EPA so that all the discipline and all the good practices that the plants are doing have the ability to get this credited on their side. So how do you do that? Essentially, from the kernel fiber process, you're allowed 500,000 gallons to produce this, and every 500,000 gallons, you have to make sure that your process is in sync. It takes discipline with your team. It takes discipline in completing your compliance plan, and all your methods of testing that you're using has to be approved. There's also, along with this pathway, you receive multiple pathways that get to be approved as wet, modified, or dried DDGs. And that is the regulations that are listed there. And how long does it take to get this pathway? Typically, we're seeing anywhere from 7 to 10 months to have this fully in place. And there is a process that's in place. It takes discipline, but it can also be very rewarding. We do have a program for this. It's called Kernel Fiber Now. And if you're interested you can start this, or even if you're looking for a financial impact to your plant and wanting to know how it looks for your plant, we'd love to go through that with you. And it's one way starch ethanol can answer the advanced biofuels initiatives on the portion that you designate, because it will be lowered by 40 points. And then when the RFS begins taking the registrations of this process, your plants have already been trained on it and you're able to do that. So I have just covered a lot of information in a short amount of time. I guess at this time I want to pass the ball on to Roxby, who's going to talk about more emerging markets and ways that this ethanol industry can answer the low carbon and clean energy issues that are coming at us.
Thank you very much, Mark. I just got a couple of slides to go through, so I'll be relatively quick. The new programs that are coming to force are the Washington program, starts January 2023, and of course, the Canadian fuel standard is coming into force towards the end of this year in December. It's a nationwide LCFS program, and it requires a 13% reduction. That's about 20 million metric tons of CO2 by 2030, and that's around like taking 5 million cars off the road. And interestingly, that's a comparable size to the California market. It's currently in the rulemaking and comment phase. We're seeing the regulations come out now. As I say, it's enforced by December the 1st, 2022. So the LCA model has been released. For the ethanol producers, you'll be happy to hear that the LCA model does not have an iLooker built in, but it does have direct land use change for conversion of farmland. And in a similar way to the Oregon system, 1 credit equals 1 ton of CO2 life cycle reduction. Sustainable aviation fuel. Strange to see this slide in an ethanol presentation. Typically, it's made from HVO. It's hydrogenated vegetable oil. But these days, I'm sure everybody's aware who's selling DCO that those feedstocks have become very expensive to the benefit of the ethanol industry. There's a long-term requirement for liquid fuels for the aviation sector. It's hard to electrify. There aren't alternatives to a good high-density kerosene-style fuel. And there's over 20 billion gallons sold in the US alone. For the SAF market, sustainable aviation fuel, you can blend up to 50% in standard aviation jet fuel. And as a bonus, we're seeing there is some evidence out there that renewable aviation fuel does actually reduce contrail cirrus formation, which is a hidden effect for radiative forcing for aviation fuel. So why is this in an ethanol presentation? Well, ethanol can be used as a precursor to make SAF. you can get something like a 55 to 65% conversion. But right now, there is no RIN for that because the ethanol is a biointermediate and it doesn't meet the EPA definitions of renewable biomass as yet. So watch this space, I think, is a message for the sustainable aviation fuel market. And I think that's it. Jim, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks very much, everyone. I appreciate the update. I want to talk a little bit about the organizational changes that ethanol producers and companies and the industry need to make. What are the organizational changes that the ethanol industry needs to make? And I want to say this from our own experience at EcoEngineers and working in low carbon in the last 13 years. Our organization has split into some teams around education, around regulatory engagement, life cycle analysis. You can see the list. It's similar for the ethanol industry. As the focus moves to low carbon, as the focus moves to a point where ethanol will participate in low carbon compliance markets, but they'll also participate in voluntary markets at the same facility. These ethanol producers will really thrive, and they're going to thrive not only by producing the products, but by being able to keep track of the carbon reductions. So there's a new acronym for today, MRV, monitoring and reporting, and the ability to verify that or to use a third-party verification. It really becomes core to the business model. And we're really seeing an acceleration towards that. We see that in terms of participating in the LCFS markets, but certainly we're going to have that kind of emphasis in the voluntary markets, in the Canadian markets, in the sustainable agriculture markets, so that these abilities to monitor, report, and verify are going to become core to the business model. So with that, I want to invite the rest of the speakers to come back on camera and open up the Q&A and turn it over to Lindsay to kind of run that a little bit.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, we have a couple of questions in here. Right here it says, Russia is a large exporter of the nitrogen fertilizer. Are you thinking that the sanctions, Mark, I assume this is for Mark, are going to impact yields of crop production? And are you committing differently to nitrogen fertilizer because of them?
That's a great question. Specifically to our farm, the short answer is we've had a lot of price increases this year. And it really forces us and pushes us harder to make it so that we are doing more with less. We're producing more crops, producing more corn, and really focused on it. But over the years, we've been really focused on getting that nitrogen, just the right amount of nutrients to the plant when it needs to, and not disturb the soil. So let Mother Nature do some of that work. And what we're finding is that actually happens. It's not just a check that we're getting from the government. The incentive actually comes from increased yields and better nutrient retention, better water retention, and really growing the crop in the way that it needs it. In the summertime, when the drought's there, it's the same way. So it is a great question. As we look ahead, this Russian situation has certainly changed everything. It's changed it for the energy and forcing it so that our industry in ethanol has the ability to come back around and produce more ethanol, clean burning ethanol, in replacement for the fossil fuels that we were and have had the ability to buy from Russia.
I want to just tag on there, Mark, and just say that fossil-based fertilizer is about half of the farm practices score. So we're really bullish about all of the work that's being done around providing lower and lower carbon, non-fossil based carbon nutrient protocols or soil amendment protocols. And some of those include biochar, many of those include manure or MSW type sludge, but it is about reusing the nutrient that's on the surface already, or reusing the nitrogen that's already on the surface. Okay.
Yep. Money's a great motivator, right? And it also changes that entire playing field, just as Jim says. And it has opened up green ammonia, blue ammonia possibilities all the way around. So yeah, we're pretty excited about that.
I have a question here regarding CCS and ethanol production. It says, do we have any insights which direction the 45Q tax credit is moving?
Well, there is IRS guidance on the 45Q tax credit out there. And in terms of where it's moving, I mean, I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I know that under the Build Back Better legislation, the new clean energy tax credit would provide producers the ability to take that new credit or 45Q as I understand it, but not both. Does anybody else want to chime in on that, Mark or Jim in particular? I'm thinking.
Yeah, I would say that the proposals that I've seen are to expand the value of the credit for both EOR and for CCS, and to extend the time frame when the projects, to both expand the credit and to extend the time frame. Now those have not been finalized, but the proposals have been trending in favor of CCS. That's my 2 cents.
Yep. I think that they're in that Build Back Better legislation. It passed the House in the fall, stalled in the Senate over around Christmas. Senator Manchin from West Virginia had some concerns. And so the talks and the conversation stalled in the Senate. Then we've had, right now we have the conflict in Ukraine and the new Supreme Court nomination that the Senate has to take up. And so for those reasons, consideration of Build Back Better, is expected to be stalled until the fall, at least. It's important for stakeholders to pay attention to the progress of the Build Back Better legislation and to, promote it and support it as you can, and let your legislators know of your support for programming proposed in that bill, including these incentives.
Here's a question. Maybe Rex, you can chime in on this one because I know you worked on the report a little bit, but in light of all the emerging supply of low carbon, where do you see the carbon values trending in California?
We did a lot of work on modeling all the different fuel types, RNG, renewable diesel, biodiesel, electricity coming into California. And we anticipate that the price is going to keep dropping. And we've modeled the floor price for that in the report that Lindsay showed earlier. We're really lucky at EcoEngineers because rather than taking kind of a trending model, we get to see all the projects that are coming up. We work on a lot of those projects, a significant number of projects, and we've aggregated that data to understand, get a very good handle on the likely supply of credits into the marketplace. So I think it's a very strong report.
Another one for you, Roxby. You mentioned that Canada would be about the same size as California. Do you see the Canada CFS having as much demand for ethanol as there has been in California?
I don't know the numbers. I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't know exactly the size of the gasoline market.
Yeah, there's a secondary question here that is, will the way the regulation is written not provide enough incentive for ethanol?
I haven't got into the modeling, so it's still early days for us.
I know that the proposal, I sort of alluded to this in the beginning, there are some biofuels stakeholders, including Advanced Biofuels Canada, that were concerned that the proposed version would not incentivize the greater investment, development, and availability of biofuels to the extent that they would like to see to achieve the decarbonization goals in Canada. So, and I know that Canada heard from stakeholders like them and others in the industry along those lines. And so it will be very interesting to see if they've updated and revised the regulation when it releases the final rule sometime in the spring, so that it will guarantee that, or better guarantee the promotion of biofuels, including ethanol.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. I mean, it's centered around the ability to export credits, which is obviously, if you're in California and you export a renewable fuel, then you don't get those credits. You have to pay back the credits. You become obligated to pay those credits back. The same thing happens in Canada for alternative fuels, but not for CCS credits attached to petroleum. And that is regarded as a problem, because it gives primacy to petroleum products.
So we've done this in all of the crystal balls. Sarah, I think you've been around for all of them, kind of gone around the table, giving us your predictions for the industry in 2022. 1 or 2 sentences. What do you think is going to happen with ethanol this year? We can start with Jim.
So the inception of carbon capture and ethanol beginning to impact voluntary credit markets around the world.
Looks like I'm next on the line, so I'll go. I think that the policies will continue to develop and get passed, and regulations continue to get finalized that will help promote the continued growth of ethanol in 2022. Mark?
Yeah, I'll go along with what Jim is saying. And I think that CCS, I think that farm practices are also going to be better recognized. I think that there's going to be some pilot programs with farm programs or with ethanol that's going to demonstrate that we do have the ability, the discipline to take it to that next step. I'm pretty positive. I'm very upbeat on fuel ethanol and it getting the credit that it deserves finally from legislators.
Yeah, I'll all of the above. I'll agree with all of you. I think that if I had all the money in the world, I'd be building an ethanol plant over some nice geology to inject CO2 and have a ethanol to jet process to take advantage of the jet market. And I think that that is going to be one of a fuel for the future. That's for certain.
That's great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I'll give you a couple minutes back of your Thursday. I just wanted to make sure that everybody out there knew that our RNG crystal ball is up, and so is our renewable diesel and biomass based diesel crystal ball webinar. They're all available on our website. So check it out. We're also I would say stay tuned on LinkedIn and Facebook and all of those fun places, and we'll be announcing new webinars as we start scheduling them. So thank you everybody for being here with us today.